Alright, one of the things thought I'd like to do for this build video is do like a build notes while I'm doing it. So I'm going to stop the build every now and then and talk to the camera, which is really weird because I don't normally do this. So one of the things I like to do before a build is to get all the bits together and just kind of do a dry run. So I've already assembled this once. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the standoffs. So I'm using the little plastic standoffs. The ones that come with it are quite short, which is fine if you just want to put the regulators underneath it. But the other thing I wanted to do is put the receiver underneath as well. And that kind of fits with these standoffs, which are the ones that I've ended up finding. But the original ones were quite a bit shorter. I don't know where to put them. But they only came up about halfway, so that wouldn't have fitted under. Try to work out how to put the regulator on. It just looks like you can directly solder that onto there. So that's going to be pretty easy. It'll still fit under there with that. So I've been test building it with this OWL, which is the same as a HS1177, except it's much nicer camera, especially for low light. It fits on there perfectly, so it's not been a problem at all. This is the camera that I'd like to use, which is the Foxeer, what is it, Arrow? Yes. The one that gives you the OSD. Yeah, Arrow. This is the version 2 with the Sense cable. And what I've noticed is the back is ever so slightly bigger. So when you try and screw it in, because of the way the camera mounts on this frame, you can't, because that doesn't quite fit there. So what I'm going to have to do is slightly trim them off. Not much, probably only about 1 millimeter. So it's just, instead of coming to there, it comes to about there. On both of the, both of the mounts. So I'll do that off camera because there's no point in recording that. It's just going to be me cutting my fingers. Alright, so I've trimmed them off and it now fits, which is good. That camera's not going nowhere. I've also noticed that this camera is ever so slightly wider, which means that when you put it in the mounts, if I can get it in the mounts, oh, it's very, very tight to get in. It does go in. I did have it in a second ago. There we go. It does go in. And then the top, you kind of have to squeeze it in to get it to go in. And I mean, that's on. And that camera is not moving. That is extremely tight in there. The rubber's compressed quite a lot there, which isn't a bad thing. It just means the camera's definitely not going to move, which is fine. I don't want the camera to move. When you pull it off, you hear a nice snap, like that. That's it, pulling apart. So that's the camera sorted out. These are the speed controllers I'm planning on using, so they're going to have to go up that way. Notice that this frame, they're all upside down. At least they're all the same way, but I'm not going to get to see my stickers. So they've also got these tabs. The tabs are really cool, but I'm just a little bit worried that when they're down and tight, I was a little bit worried that that would short against the frame, but I guess it's so far away it's not really going to be a problem. So yeah, they come with an extra piece of shrink wrap, which I seem to have lost. It's around here somewhere. And I was thinking of cutting those open, soldering them on, and then re-shrink wrapping them. But given how far away from the frame that is, I don't think I'm going to bother. I've got some electrical tape, so I will, nice blue electrical tape to match the frame. I'll just put one wrap round of electrical tape around that, and if I hold them nice and tight to the frame, nice thick arms on the frame, then and I solder onto the top, so these will be the motors, then that's not going to be a problem. I did notice even with these pushed up as far as I can get there, the motors will sit there. The motors have got obviously a bit of shrink wrap holding the cables in place there. That's just a bit long. So what I'm going to do with all the motors is just peel that back about, and that's where it ends. I'll peel that back to about there. So it's not going to make any difference to the motor, but what it'll let me do is splay the cables apart just a little bit further. I'm going to cut these short. I'm not going to do what I did on my Shrieker and just wrap them round. I'm going to actually cut these to fit because this is going to be a racing quad, and that will save me a little bit of weight, a couple of grams tops. But I'm also not planning on using these motors anywhere else. They were bought specifically for this frame. They're actually the second set of motors I bought for this frame. I bought some Cobras, the old race edition Cobras. They're very, very nice motors. They're also quite heavy. So these are the RCX motors. They are noticeably lighter. I mean, these are 2206s, so they've got a little bit more torque. These are in 2205s. Not a huge difference. But these are a lot newer. They're also 2400 kV, and these are 2100 kV, which is, again, in a race quad, that's not a massive difference because you're very rarely at full throttle. But the weight difference, I mean, there's 6 or 7 grams in these, and they've got approximately the same, like the cables, maybe a gram's difference in cable there, which isn't going to make any difference because I'm cutting it all off anyway. But that means I also have a set of Cobras to put on something, so I'll probably end up doing a acro quad with those, or if I end up getting a red frame, putting them on that, or swapping this over to the red frame because of the red bottoms. Actually, that's not a bad idea, I might do that. That'll give me two SCXs, which is awesome. Definitely need 2 quads when you're racing. I think that's about it. Don't really need the owl anymore. Yeah, the flight controller. So I've got the SP Racing Evo, and this is the first time I've used this flight controller. So I bought it because it's got the IR built in for the race timing. But we always run with our timing gate to the right of the quad, so that's the front, so the timing gate would be over here, so the IR has to stick out the side there. I've already soldered it on. I've also put some heat shrink on the leads because I didn't want to run this too far off the board. You can see I'll get that out of the way, the SCX has got plenty of open space on the side there, so that shouldn't have any difficulty getting a signal out. So it's going to need to go that way, and according to the little arrow it wants to go that way, which is dumb anyway. I mean, why would you put the USB connector at the front? It's much easier to get to it on the side. So that just means that in Betaflight I'm going to need to rotate the board, which is not an issue. I think I've had to do that on every board I use anyway. But I don't have a manual for this. I know it can't take battery voltage, doesn't have a regulator in it, hence the regulator on the board, which is now fallen over there. So that's a 5-volt Pololu. So I'll run this off of that, which is great. Armatan board's good for that. But I don't know which pins it's supposed to come in on. I suspect it's these pins over here, because that one's labelled 5 volts and that looks like a ground. I also suspect you can put it in on any of these and it'll probably be fine, but I don't want to mess it up because this isn't a cheap flight controller. And I know those are the battery voltage sensors because when you turn them over it says battery 2 to 6S. So it's quite a nice board. It's got quite a lot of options. Got the micro SD for logging. And yeah, I'm hoping this will be quite nice. It's already got I've already soldered the boot pins on as well, so I've already put Betaflight 2.9 on this. I'll be upgrading that to 3 before I fly. Yeah, that's it for the moment. Alright, almost ready to start. I finally got the manual for the flight controller, and pretty much says don't use these pins for input, they're output only, because they're connected directly to the USB. So I won't be using those as inputs, I'll probably be using them as regulated outputs to the receiver, which means I can just use these pins here for input. So these will take a 5-volt regulated input, which is what we want. So this is going to be my FPV train. Normally don't show the build with these because I keep it separate. So this will be obviously connects straight off to the PDB. That's the sensor pin. That connects straight into there. It's not running through the PDB or anything else. So that's not a problem. I'll need to cut these cables a lot shorter. I'm a little bit worried. Well, I'm still not entirely sure how I'm going to mount that. Whether it's going to sit that way around or not, because when you mount it on, this is the top, it lines up about like that. So I don't know whether that's coming up properly, but there's a gap, there's quite a big gap. It works out well on the top because you can still get to the button which is in there. Whereas up the other way, I'm going to turn it around, the button is actually directly over the boot pins on the flight controller, which is a pain in the bum. But it seems to sit a little bit, go the other way up. There's still a gap between the top, between the transmitter and the top of the quad, but not a huge gap, and it would let me put something on there, so I still haven't decided how I'm going to do that. I'll probably decide right at the end, because that's normally how I do these things. This is the optional LiPo pad. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to use the whole thing because it's quite big. It goes across the whole bottom like that. I'm just going to cut it off there, across here, so it's just that piece there. The battery strap's coming through there anyway, and the LiPo will be kind of sit like that. So I don't really need these bits on the outside, so I'm going to cut them off. Ooh. But other than that, this is nice sort of neoprene type stuff, so it should stop the battery sliding around, which is good. And that should pretty much be it. I think I'm ready to start. Right, I've stopped the recording here because the battery went on the camera, but also this was a nice spot. So I've got all the ESCs done and the motors done. I'm not entirely happy with this, well, not really with the soldering, but with the length of these. They're a little short. I think if I was to do this again, I wouldn't make them quite so short. I'd probably just double them around a little bit. But it should be fine. I did exactly the same thing on my F1 and it worked out okay, and they're definitely all soldered in. You can move them around and all the cables go with it. So they should be okay. This I was also a little bit worried about, but it's stuck on quite nicely, so that's not moving anywhere. And I sort of needed to plan the next bit anyway, so the plan is to put the receiver on this way up so that it sits, so that the gap in the receiver there sits over the regulator. And that's the other reason why I put the regulator on that side. So this is 5 volts and this isn't connected to anything, so that connector will sit over the regulator output there, but there's nothing actually coming out of that regulator output, so it's okay. I'll probably end up putting some sort of foam double-sided tape or something under there. This does mean with the board though, I've got some interesting cabling to do. So I kind of wish I'd put the board that way around, but then the IR receiver's on the wrong side. Fold it that way. But I wanted to kind of hot glue that onto there. You can see, you might not be able to see it's hot glued, but it is, onto the connector, so that gives it some stability. So with it that way around, which is the way around I have to go to get the IR on the right hand side. Whoops. The voltage sensor pins are here, so I'm going to need to run 2 cables from the back up to the front there, because that's 5 volt out. I've tested this, that's 5 volt out. That's got no voltage output, and that's got no voltage output because that regulator doesn't exist. So the only battery voltage I've got is either off of these pads for the ESCs or off of the battery connection, which is fine. I can do it off the battery connector. So I'm going to need to run 2 cables from the battery connector up to the front, and then from the 5 volts I need to connect them into here. I don't want to use 1 through 4 because that's what I'm using for the ESC, so the closest one is 5, which is about halfway down, so I have to run some cables from these all the way across the board up here. Again, that's not a big deal. I'm going to try and put some excess cable in, so if I need to lift this board out at any point, it's actually got some leeway to move. But it is going to be pretty tight. Yeah, that should be it. So that's probably the first thing I'm going to do, is put the cables in. And yeah, see how we go. Okay, so this is the next day. I still haven't actually finished putting the quad together, so the top is still loose, sort of, and the FPV gear isn't attached yet. However, I did take the opportunity to test the electronics, and they're good. I bound the receiver, which actually putting it under there was really dumb because I can't get to the button, so I had to pull the whole thing apart, bind it, stuff it all back in again. But that works fine, which is good. The FPV system also works, so this is the cable that I've soldered in. That connects to the transmitter. So the transmitter ends up sitting about there. It goes through the back here. That's another thing. There's a little rubber grommet that comes with this that I've misplaced momentarily. It's around here somewhere, like everything else. Oh, you've got this piece as well, which is kind of cool. This is a pretty good design. So that has like a square hole that goes over the connector like that. That then goes over like that, so those line up. Then the little rubber piece that there it is, I've just found, goes over the end like that, and then your antenna screws on. Sorry for getting my hands in the way. Antenna screws on like that, and it goes on really tight, and then the antenna doesn't move. That piece holds the receiver square, and then that all sits in there. So that actually will hold it off of the flight controller all on its own, which is really kind of cool. So yeah, that connects into, so you've got battery power goes into the transmitter. Transmitter has a 5 volt output, 5 volts goes into the camera. I'm going to have to cut these a lot shorter because that's far too long. Far too much cable. The camera obviously goes on the front, and that's the voltage sensor, so that then comes back to the positive connection on there. That again I'll have to cut shorter once I've worked out all the distances. Honestly, these cables will probably be about that long in the end. And the camera goes on the front. Tested the whole thing and it works. The Fox Ear, the arrow shows the voltage without an OSD, which is really cool. The menu for the Fox Ear, however, was completely corrupt. It was a pain in the backside. I'm going to try and get some footage of it while I've still got it. You use this little board, connects onto there. But it was terrible. It was really difficult to read. I managed to work it out in the end. But yeah, it sort of follows what the manual says, but not really. Which was, yeah, made it really difficult. The other thing is, so I've swapped the lens out. I use a 2.5mm lens. I know a lot of people use a 2.1. I find a 2.1 is a bit too fisheyed. 2.5 is great. It gives you that little bit extra to see over a 2.8, which is the standard. But it's up to you. You can do what you want. The one thing with the 2.5s I've got is they're quite a bit wider than the 2.8s. And I will put this camera back in. So this is a 5-inch prop. Prop goes on there. That's good enough. Good enough for demo purposes. And look how close that is to the camera. I don't know whether you can really pick it up there, but there's next to no gap. I mean, it very nearly touches the camera mount. It very nearly touches the lens on the camera, but it does miss them both. It's not going to flex in the way. I would be a little bit worried about bullnose props, especially hitting the frame. I might need to push that back a little bit further. That might help. But they shouldn't hit. It should work fine. It's just high enough. If I'd have put the Cobras on, the Cobras are 2206s, that would have raised the prop up ever so slightly, and then it would be, instead of passing, it passes about here. 2206 it would pass up here a little bit, and it would have a little bit more clearance. So that would be cool, but whatever, it works. I guess there's no wasted space, but definitely not going to be running 5.5-inch props on this. But yeah, so the only bit I've got left to do now is fit the FPV gear in permanently, which I will add to the time lapse, and that should be it. Everything's all and flash it with the latest Betaflight and flash the ESCs, which I won't put on camera, and tape them down. Oh, the other bit that I was going to complain about, I completely forgot. So you would have seen on the time lapse, if you've seen it, me soldering in these cables under here. That was the stupidest soldering I think I've ever done in my life. What I should have done was pulled the whole board off, pushed them through, and soldered them in, rather than leaving the whole thing attached and it being only barely out, and then having to use my little extra fingers to hold the thing up so that I could get a soldering iron in there. I really didn't think about that one very well, but you make mistakes when you're doing these things, and if I build another one, I won't make that mistake again. They are, however, all in. One thing you may have noticed is I soldered one of the negative leads, the first one, in the wrong spot. I fixed that off camera because it doesn't look very good fixing your soldering on a time lapse. But yeah, like I said, it all works. All the motors spin up. I don't know what direction they go in, but they all spin up individually and the right numbers, so that's all cool.